back here on the Cover 3 podcast. Cooper Patagna, Andrew Ivins, new dad Andrew Ivins, they have been grinding to make sure that the 24/7 sports player rankings for the transfer portal are the best in the business. Those are two of the best evaluators of talent that I know. And when we got the heads up that a new reworked top 100 was going to be out, that it was something that caught my attention, because what it does is I think it brings a lot of clarity to the teams that were able to add players that are going to be like truly, truly significant. And so if you are curious, and please head over to 24/7 Sports to check it out, the number one player in the new rankings is actually from the Mountain West. It is former Nevada offensive tackle Isaiah World, who is at Oregon. Now, he has seen a major boost in his rating. Other big movers up also from Purdue to Oregon, Dylan Tiemann. So Oregon Ducks getting a couple of key additions, once on the offensive line, once in the defensive backfield. Now, Damon Wilson, former Georgia edge rusher, going to Missouri. He's at number 2. Carson Beck, they're a former Georgia quarterback, headed to Miami. He's at number 3. And Eric Singleton Jr., wide receiver from Georgia Tech, going to Auburn at number 4. Rounding out the top 5, John Mateer, Oklahoma's new quarterback. The other players that saw a big boost would be the offensive tackle from North Carolina, Howard Sampson, who's now headed to Texas Tech. Josh Thompson, the interior offensive lineman from Northwestern, headed to LSU. So we're really starting to get a better feel for the talent level of some of these players going in. But I was curious, as you were looking across the top 100, whether it was an adjustment, whether it was just kind of seeing all those team names all lined up next to each other. Did you have any big takeaways from the re-ranking of the top 100?
Yeah. So I'm glad that Coop and those guys did not go nuts with awarding like 5 stars and high 4-star ratings, because I don't think that this transfer class has a lot of like top end difference makers. I just don't. I think this class is probably a little bit less talented than last year's, and I think last year's was less talented than the year before. And that's not to say that I am less excited about the transfer portal than I once was, but it is to say that I think more teams are doing a better job of keeping their studs. I don't think that there's a Keon Coleman type situation this year where you have, what do you want to call Michigan State? Like a high major? Like Michigan State is a top 30 job in the sport. We would agree?
Like
30, 35.
Yeah, ish.
Like top half of the Power 5.
100%. Yes.
Okay. So what you're not seeing this year is like a top half of the Power 5 job losing like a 1-year type rental player for the most part, who they wanted to keep. Like I'm sure Michigan State wanted to keep Coleman. In this case, who's the top receiver? Eric Singleton, Georgia Tech's like not a top half Power 5 job to me. I don't think it's like bottom 10, but it's in the bottom half, I think. Like, okay, so you lose him to Auburn. Deuce Robinson, like he's the 7th rated player in the transfer portal. He wasn't special at USC. He's a good player, but not like a Keon Coleman, like, oh, dude, like that guy's a first round, if he stays healthy, or top 100 pick, a no doubter. So I don't see a lot of like big time, no doubt NFL guys in this transfer portal. And I think that's a great thing for college football, because to me, it means that these teams in, let's say, like non-top 15 teams in the Power 5 are now finding a way to use that house money to keep their studs for the most part, which I think is good. Like Isaiah World, cool. Like Nevada's not going to keep a player like that. It's probably good for him to go up and play against better competition at some point. John Mateer, like Wazoo's not going to keep that. And we don't know if he's going to be any good at Oklahoma. I think he'll be good, but there's also some chance he's just fun and not actually great, right?
Whoa. We can be okay with fun. We are not rooting for Oklahoma's wins and losses. So, fun is good. Fun's good in our book.
Like, I don't think Florida State wanted to keep Patrick Payton. I think they were, like, kind of tired of his act, to be honest. If they wanted to stay for super cheap or something, maybe, but I think they were ready for him to move on. I think he wanted to move on. There's not a ton on this list that gets me super excited. Like, Zach Branch, maybe he crushes it for Georgia, but it's not like he crushed it at USC. You
get to Fernando Mendoza really fast.
Yeah.
And I like Fernando Mendoza, but you don't have to get very deep on this list. from the quarterback perspective before you start to get to that caliber of player. Proven power conference starter, yes. But like our offense has been changed fundamentally, I don't think so.
Okay, so what I do think you see, though, additionally, is because there are not a lot of guys here who have awesome upside traits, because I think the schools are finding a way to largely keep those dudes with crazy high upside. The schools that do a good job of figuring out which flaws they can deal with in a player and how that player can fit in their system, kind of like it, everybody's got some kind of craziness. Can you deal with their brand of crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be really important for some of the teams out there. Like Texas Tech took a lot of players here, and there's some exciting guys, but there's not a lot of like no doubt studs that they took. They feel really great about their class. Cool, but how many guys are going to be like top 100 picks out of their transfer class? I'd set the over under at like maybe one out of one of the top rated transfer classes. So as a blue chip ratio guy, I feel great about this because I don't use transfers in my main blue chip ratio thing because I don't think that transfers are very good compared to the best kids you get out of high school. In fact, I've been doing some aggregation of mock drafts, and right now it looks like only 7 of the top 32 players projected to the first round were transfers. So the vast majority are still being signed out of high school. You pay for them out of high school because they're worth it. The top ones hit at a really high level, and you pay to keep them every year, and you win with them.
Which I agree with you that this is good for college football, because I think the one thing that really concerned fans and fans were getting fed up with was losing good players. And they might not have been household names, guys that are going to be first-round picks, but they're really good football players that, hurt when you follow their recruiting process. You follow them. And then to lose them, I think that is somewhat what kind of killed college basketball, the one and dones, which I know it's a different scenario, but if you have guys that are only staying for a year or two, you don't get to know them. You get disheartened when they decide to leave your school after a decent first year, and it just gets hard to keep following them. The other thing I do notice, and I believe this, like this quarterback class is not great. And I think that's evidenced by the fact there's only 2 in the top 19. And then you get to Mendoza, who's good. Right. But even at the top tier, like I'm still a little bit skeptical on Carson Beck. Mateer, I probably like him slightly better because he is going with his coordinator. Tougher competition, clearly. But I don't think there's a guy out there that just looks like a clear-cut number one. That's the guy that everybody wants, which, again, I think is probably good. You're getting guys that are going to stay in their systems. You have continuity. They're learning. They're getting developed as opposed from hopping from school to school to school.
Cam Ward was maybe that player from this past portal class. Okay. Yeah. Another little note here: of the top 25 players in the re-rack, all but 4 of them are going to the Big Ten or the SEC. And of those 4 that are going outside, they are going to Miami, they are going to Florida State, they're going to Texas Tech, and they are going to Cal. So you still are continuing to see that as something that is, even if the transfer portal talent level is down, the schools that are getting the best are not even necessarily the top schools in all of college football, but at least the schools that are at the 2 conferences that are continuing to separate themselves in terms of resources, investment, and the like, the Big Ten and the SEC.
Right. Exactly. I think you don't, how many of your top playoff contenders are taking like more than 1 or 2 players in this thing?
Right.
Not many.
Yeah, I was counting them up. Yeah. I was going by school. I was looking at it and I said, okay, so it is heavily slanted towards the Big Ten and the SEC, but I don't see Alabama loaded up here. I don't see Georgia loaded up here. I mean, Georgia is taking Zach Branch, but it's not like there's a lot of other ones in there as well.
And so Noah Thomas, who's like a top 30 guy. I could see that. I could see Thomas being the guy that they wanted Colby Young to be potentially.
That's right.
But ultimately, I mean, it's how many of these guys can really play for these top 4 or 5 teams out there? I don't think that many. I mean, Auburn took a ton of guys, but I mean, is it because Auburn is desperate and Hugh Freeze is probably on the hot seat, doesn't win this year, and they had a ton of money saved up to spend planning for this year's portal?
Or just because Auburn is also just decidedly a middle of the pack SEC team right now.
Right.
They're not competing for SEC championships yet. So that's like you're going in and you're trying to see what you can do. You're just ordering a lot of mystery beers. Y'all ever go to the bar and they got that mystery beer night?
Oh, the mystery tap, yeah.
Well, it's like it's. Oh, I was thinking about it like it's only $2. They just like reach in and they're gonna pull. They got 5 different kinds of beer in there, and they're only gonna pull out one. And you know what? One of them might be delicious. One of them might get kicked off your team by the beginning of October, and I don't know. It could work out one way or the other. One more portal note before we turn the page and start to really get into the Big 12 stuff. Something we did not get a chance to really circle back to is the Notre Dame offensive line exodus. Now, we saw Notre Dame really have its offensive line tested in a major way this season. They answered the call. Some young players really stepped up. But in the wake of that national championship game loss to Ohio State, we saw some fairly significant names go and hit the transfer portal. Nebraska and Indiana among those that start to pick up those players along the way. But are you adjusting your expectations at all with some of those pickups?
Not really, but I do think the Notre Dame center is a nice get. When he played for the Irish this year, I thought he played with good effort, and I like for Indiana. That's a nice get. I certainly don't think Indiana is going to maintain its level of play from last year, but that's really not all that intriguing of a statement to make. I think the real mystery is how big is the drop off if they do indeed. I think they'll suffer a drop off.
Pat Coogan.
How big is that?
I was dropping that. Sorry, apologize that. So Pat Coogan is off to Indiana, and that would be Rocco Spindler, who's with Nebraska. I was afraid I was going to get those twisted as well. But both very experienced players, both very good players. But that is the bonus now for the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the Hoosiers.
Is Notre Dame at a level, because I've talked about this before, like beware of the player that leaves a program that could have kept them. Like if you get a player from a Georgia or Ohio State, like teams with deep pockets, I think Notre Dame's in that category. So is this a buyer beware of sorts for the programs that these players are leaving to? Because you would think that, hey, if Notre Dame wants these guys back, they'll just pay whatever the number is.
Playing time is still a very, very valuable commodity. And I don't think that Coogan was going to start for the Irish, correct?
Yeah.
And like based on how I read the depth chart, I could be wrong, and we have a lot of Notre Dame fans in the chat, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he was going to start. And at some point, you want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Spindler is like a 5th-year player too, so I mean, you might be starting to look at
a
like,
younger guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's where you might say Notre Dame's at the level where they also feel good about their young guys, and it's time to be able to go out there. And if there's a negotiation and a number that's out there from somebody else, that Notre Dame's just not ready to invest. And that's, one of the great tasks of a general manager in the college football world. We're not yet to trade deadlines, but damn, we are at salary cap management when it comes to figuring out what you're willing to pay, what they're worth on the market, and elsewhere.